What is the true nature of the universe?
And I really, in the 90s, the Marvel comics and the DC comics, they went through a period that people who like were reading the comics at the time, I would have liked them probably a lot more when I was 12 than like at the time
Really?
I was in my like late 20s, right? So it's like having everybody wearing a leather jacket with all kinds of pouches on it and having these
Oh, yeah.
gigantic guns and all this kind of stuff was not as appealing to me at the time.
No.
So I stopped reading a lot of the Marvel books,
Oh,
you know,
really?
because the only I kept up on Spider-Man, but like I dropped Avengers. You know, Avengers started having like, you know, like Doctor Druid and like all these like really fourth string characters in it. And again, they were all wearing leather jackets on top of it. It's like, I'm done with this. And then, you know, but at DC, I had kind of switched over and I was reading a lot of the Vertigo books. So, you know,
Oh.
Sandman came
Oof.
out and Hellblazer and Swamp Thing, which at the time was, you know, that Alan Moore run when they changed. And it's kind of like the classic, you know, stuff that people look back on and they're like making into TV shows and movies and stuff now is the stuff that got
Uh-huh.
created back then. Watchmen, of course, that was the 80s. But, you know, all these things. So I was reading kind of not the I had kind of switched away a little bit from the mainstream superhero stuff, and I was reading a lot of these independent comics. I was reading a lot of the Vertigo stuff at DC, but it's not, you know, I never completely stopped reading superheroes, and even today, I still like I have my comics that I got this week. So you know, it's like I got the new
Ah,
issue of Spider-Man, you know, so I'm still reading Spider-Man. But then what's my next one on the stack?
okay.
American Vampire from Vertigo, and then I have the Autumnal, which is a kind of
Okay.
a horror comic from a company called Vault. And then
Vault.
I go into okay, Birthright from Image Comics and Cutting Edge, which is
Oof.
from Titan Comics. This is a European. It was originally published in French, I think, and this is a English translation.
Okay.
Beautiful art in this one. I started reading at some point. I started reading, you know, English translations of foreign of comics that were created in other countries. I don't necessarily read the language, but you know, when they do the English translations of things from Spain, things from France, things from Italy, things from Japan, things from the Nordic countries.
Wow.
There's a lot of great comics being created in these other countries, and I was like, you know, the stuff that they would translate into English was usually the stuff that was like kind of like the best stuff, right?
Yeah.
Just like they don't take everything and translate it into Spanish. They usually take the more popular things and translate them into Spanish. So you're not getting necessarily all the really, you know, lousy, you know,
See,
stuff that just like comes out. You know, it's like they take some of the better stuff or more
of course.
popular things and they do the translations on them. Same thing anyway, because they want stuff that's going to sell really well and that's already been proven to be popular. And that's why that's the kind of stuff that they use, that Hollywood uses, right,
Yeah.
to turn into movies and turn into the core material for TV series and things like that and movies and all that. So anyway, I just love all comics, and I would try to get them from all parts of the world. And when I had a job, um, you know, when I was in my 30s, and I would travel because I've traveled to Europe and I've traveled
Oh,
to Japan and Singapore and China. I would buy comics, and then I was in Korea and I got like a comic in
wow.
Korean. But I would maybe get some local books, but then I would also get like the translations of American comics so that I could like kind of hold them up next to the
Of
American one and
course.
kind of figure out, you know, okay, what's going on in this, because you know it'd have the because I was familiar with the story, but you know it'd be fun. So I have like Japanese comics in my collection, and Chinese comic, Korean comics, and
Nice.
German versions of Spider-Man and Thor and Fantastic Four, and Italian ones, and all this kind of
Wow.
stuff. And of course, I've got the Spider-Man, and I've got some Avengers from Mexico, and
Ooh.
different ones like that I would just find over the time, and they're fun. But then, some of the local ones are good too. It's just I can't necessarily read all of those. Although technology now, they have an app where you can
Of
hold your
course.
phone over the word bubbles, and it'll actually do a translation
Yeah.
of the word bubble into your language. So, it's like detect this language, or if you know what language it is. Someone in Holland sent me some Dutch translations of comics that were originally published in Quebec in Canada. So they
Wow.
were in French Canadian, but they were translated into Dutch. And they sent me these comics in the
Crazy.
mail, and I'm holding my phone over them, and it's sort of translating the Dutch into English for me. And I was able to read these comics that way, which was fun. It was like they were actually pretty good stories. I mean, it's like something that I had never read before, so I always like getting exposed to the different characters and stories that I've never seen before, because that's what it's
Yeah.
all about, right? Is that if you love just the art form of comics and just the way that they tell stories with the combination of the pictures and the words,
See.
it's really good. So
So,
that's kind of like that's my, and I never stopped reading comics when I was a teenager. Like a lot of people, it's I discovered girls and I didn't read comics. Well, I like girls, but I also, and that's like my wife. I've been married. Oh, we'll be married 37 years this year, I think.
careful,
So, yeah. And she knew I read comics when we started going out.
Okay.
When I was in college. I didn't hide it from her, and I think that's good because I feel sorry. Some of these guys yeah, my wife's always getting at me to throw out my comics, and it's like, oh,
No.
she knew what she was getting into when she
Yeah.
met me. So
No.
she knows I read comics, and she doesn't bother me that much about it.
Cool. Every time I date a girl, I always warn them, hey, I have a thing with comics, so please. So they don't.
Yeah, and it's just like it's not like there's worse things. You
Yeah, of course.
you could be a drunk or something.
Yes, for
I think
sure.
it's better to find you like you spent some money on comics and you blew your whole paycheck on tequila and you're like just all drunken laying in an alley somewhere. It's like, would they rather find you
No,
sitting in your
of
room
course.
reading a stack of comic books, right? It's
That's
the
better.
lesser of things that you could be doing that women have problems with.
Of course, of course. I'm just saying it in a fun way. It's just like a
Yeah,
way of
it's always
mocking.
good, right?
See,